Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. This is Johan Rempel from CIDI at Georgia Tech. And we have the privilege once again of hearing Dr. Valerie Morrison present on the topic of writing effective alternative text for images, where she's going to highlight the fact that this is very often more of an art than a science, and takes a level of creativity and ingenuity to create effective alt text that's meaningful for individuals who are relying on screen reading technology. Next slide. So once again, we are providing captions for this training. There are two ways to access the captions. One of them is through the stream text link, which I'll ask our captionist to put in the chat when she has a moment. And what that does, it opens up a third-party application that allows for additional versatility and options for captioning. And then the second way is to simply access the closed captions option with the CC above it in the Zoom toolbar, where the bright red arrow is pointing to. And for those who are using keyboard only or a screen reader, that can very easily be tabbed to and accessed that way. Next slide. And then for any of you hosting or co-hosting a webinar or training in the future, these are some important aspects related to Zoom. The spotlighting feature and pinning feature. The spotlighting feature from an accessibility standpoint is really beneficial, especially when you have when you're providing accommodations for ASL interpreters, American Sign Language interpreters. It allows the end user to see the ASL interpreter at all times, and then pinning. Any participant can pin any other participant's video at any time. It's very easy to do this. You simply hover over the participant that you want to spotlight or pin, select the ellipsis, the ... and then from there you have a menu of either spotlight or pin. Next slide. And if I see some of the familiar names in the attendee list, so you've all heard a little bit about CIDI very briefly. We are housed within the College of Design at Georgia Tech, and pretty much everything we touch and do is related to disability awareness, accessibility services, technical assistance, in some capacity or another. That includes Braille services, captioning, accessibility of websites and applications, user experience testing. Dr. Valerie Morrison oversees our eText department, and then our assistive technology, our Tools for Life team under the Assistive Technology Act of Georgia. Next slide. And with that, before we pass it on, I wanted to just bring a quick reminder to you all that in 2 weeks, June 24th, we're going to have, June 10th, we're going to have our next training on the topic of legal landscape of digital accessibility and brief overview of WCAG 2.0 and 2.1. That's June 10th, same time, 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. And with that, I will pass it on to Dr. Morrison.
Thank you so much, Johan. I appreciate it. And hi, everyone. My name is Valerie Morrison, and today we're going to be going through a training on how to write effective alternative text for images. And I've divided it up into 3 main goals for all of us to accomplish today. So the first is to learn how to do the technical part, right? How to insert alt text. And I'm going to show you how to insert alt text into a Microsoft Word document and a PDF file. And when I show you how to do it, you'll know how to do it in almost any program because they're very similar. And then the next goal is to discuss how to write effective alternative text description. And then the third will be to look through specific examples of different types of images that you might encounter in an educational, business, or just day-to-day setting. So I have a wide variety of examples, and hopefully you'll be able to then refer back to this presentation, either to the video recording that we're doing now or the PowerPoint itself, and use those examples as templates if you need to. And so as Johan said, writing alt text, it is an art form, and it does take some practice in order to be good at it, to feel confident in it. And we're going to talk a little bit about how to come up with an approach so you don't feel like you're starting over at square one every single time you have to describe an image. It really helps to have a general approach so you can get into a rhythm and feel confident about how you are describing things, what to include, what not to include, and how to really help people with disabilities understand the material. So I manage the eText department at CIDI, like Johan mentioned, and my team helps me make accessible materials for individuals with print-related disabilities. So we provide a wide variety of accessible digital formats for people. We work mainly in the higher ed space, so we have a lot of orders from students who are ordering accessible versions of their textbooks, often with very complex material. And then we also work with university staff, publishers, different corporations, different state agencies, different nonprofit groups to ensure that the material they create and distribute will be accessible. And when I say accessible, I don't just mean, oh, I have a PDF and I'm going to email it to you. When I say accessible, I mean that it is available on the computer. That's step one. And then the assistive technology can read through it smoothly and describe all the images and access all the text in the proper reading order. So it's not just a matter of having a digital file. You want to make sure that that digital file is accessible to someone using assistive technology. And a big part of that is alt text. So it's not just students who are blind or low vision who need their images described. There are many, many individuals who like to have image description. So, you know, moving beyond just, you know, individuals who cannot see the images or who have trouble, you know, parsing the color. They might have color blindness or low vision and need to magnify the image in order to see all the parts. But individuals who have different learning disabilities, such as dyslexia or dyscalculia or dysgraphia, or even ADHD, if it's a complex chart or graph, or there's a lot of text or numbers in the image, having that image description is going to help someone with a learning disability. Even though they can see the image, they will also get the added benefit of that auditory processing. So individuals with head injuries, trauma, or cognitive disabilities, either permanent or temporary, can benefit from having image description. And then individuals accessing content on tablets or phones where the image is very small, they might not have the ability to magnify it or pinch and zoom in to see the image clearly. Sometimes the image might not load on a website, or it might, your browser is not compatible for some reason. So having image description that will be read aloud will make all of that content reliably accessible to most people. And then finally, I would say that there's a huge population of auditory learners and then people who are getting older. It's a constant in life, unfortunately, that we are all aging. And so our eyesight deteriorates a bit, and having image description only can help make things more accessible. So the first thing that you want to do is make sure that if you are creating a document, either a Microsoft Word document or a PowerPoint presentation, Microsoft recently rolled out an update where they were trying to automate alt text writing, and it was not very successful. I have a screenshot here of a Microsoft Word doc that has a bar graph on it. And you can see it's very small. In the alt text pane, there was automatic alt text description written. And what the AI tried to describe this image as was, quote, a screenshot of a cell phone. So that's not adequate and it's not accurate. And I don't even know what a screenshot of a cell phone means. So we don't like the automated alt text. Now, recently, Microsoft kind of put that aside and it no longer is the default option. But if you don't have the latest update, you might still have this running in the background. And so I've included instructions on the slide for how you could turn that automated option off. You would click on File, then click on Options, select Ease of Access, and scroll down and uncheck the box that says automatically generate alt text for me. And you would want to do this in both Microsoft Word and PowerPoint. Now, that said, it's been about 4 or 5 months now that they've done away with that. And so now I don't even have the ability to go to ease of access. My latest update of Microsoft Office does not have the automated alt text, which I'm very thankful for. I think Microsoft realized it wasn't doing the best work and they took that off for a while. All right, so alternative text descriptions, how do you insert your alt text? So there are 2 different methods I have in this bulleted list on the right-hand side. There are 2 ways you can get to the alt text field, and depending on how the image was inserted, whether you copied and pasted it in or whether it was inserted, there are going to be different ways you can write your alt text. So the first method is to right-click on the image, and here we see another screenshot of a Microsoft Word doc, and I have an image of a painting by Van Gogh inserted on the page. So I would right-click on the image, and I would choose Edit Alt Text from the drop-down menu. And then this pane would open up. I would have a box where I could type in my description. When you right-click on the image, if you do not see the Edit Alt Text option, you're going to select the option that says Picture, and then you'll click on the Alt Text tab, and that will take you to the same place where you can edit and write your alt text description. When you get to this field where you can write your alt text, type in the description field using proper grammar, spacing, and punctuation, and write it all as one paragraph. Don't try to create separate paragraphs or hard line breaks because the screen reader might skip and think that it's finished when it comes to the end. It might not know to keep going. So don't create extra separate paragraphs in your alt text field. So some workflow options. There are lots of ways to go about this if you have a large document and a lot of alt text to write. And our team will sometimes have a textbook that has over 1,000 images in it. And so we're real good at coming up with different workflows to try and tackle a big project for alt text. So, if it's a small document, you can scroll through the document from start to finish. And then each time you encounter an image, just right-click on it and edit your alt text. Another option, if you don't want to scroll, if you have a larger document and your scroll wheel, sometimes they get squeaky, or sometimes your finger gets tired, or sometimes you're using a different type of mouse to help with your movement, or you might prefer using an accessible mouse. So we also recommend this workflow, and I have a screenshot of the Find and Replace dialog box. So you go to the Home ribbon, you go to Find and Replace, and then you select the Go To tab that's in the screenshot, and then you can scroll down to graphic. And when you do this, you leave this little dialog box open and you just hit next, 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 and it jumps to each graphic in your document, and you can add your alt text easily and move through your document with just clicking instead of scrolling. And then the third recommendation for workflow is a lot of people like to start at the end, which is, I usually think of accessibility checks as something that you do at the end of the process, but many people like to do run the accessibility check right away, because that enables them to see what the problems are and get an idea of what work they need to do at the beginning of the process. So that's an amazing approach. And when you run the accessibility check, it will generate a report of all the images that need alt text description. And you could just click on each one and add your descriptions one by one. So that's another workflow option. This slide will show you a screenshot of what the accessibility checker looks like in both Microsoft Word and Microsoft PowerPoint. So when you want to run the accessibility check, you will go to the Review tab and select Check Accessibility. If you are working with an older version of Office, it's hidden away a little bit, and you will click on the File tab, then click on Check for Issues, and then select Check Accessibility. So both of those different options in that second bullet will get you to the same place, and it will run an accessibility check. It will open up in a separate pane next to your page, next to your content, and it will list all of the errors and warnings and tips in one long list that you could then click on and fix if you want to in your document. And then additional information will appear below in the screenshot on the right-hand side of the screen here. We've got our errors, our warnings, our tips, and then down below, why fix and how to fix. So it will walk you through and give you some additional information about how to fix these different errors. One thing I just want you to know, in the work that we do, we are using the accessibility checker for informational purposes, but to have a completely accessible document, it's not exactly equal to having the accessibility checker be clear, right? So your goal is not to completely clear out every single thing on this list, but we use the accessibility checker to make sure we're doing our due diligence, we're fixing what we can. But for instance, in this list, it gives me a warning that my headings are too long. But if this is not my document and someone gave this to me, I don't have the authority to change the heading. And so I read that warning and I say, well, okay. And then I leave it because I'm not really authorized to change the original. But we do, so I don't want everyone to feel like the accessibility checker is the be all end all. So we have our own internal checklists that we rely on. To add alt text to a PDF file, there are different steps involved, but they do involve right-clicking again. So right-clicking is my favorite way to figure out how to access different features in files. So if you need to add alt text to an image for a PDF file, we internally use Adobe Acrobat to make PDF files accessible. And so if you're in Acrobat, you'll click on Tools, and then you'll select the Accessibility tools. From the Accessibility tools, you will select the Reading Order tool. And once you select Reading Order tool, it will highlight all the content on your page. This image on the right-hand side of the slide shows you all of the text and all of the figures. They have little boxes around them, and each figure, it will tell you what the alt text is, and if no alt text is available, it will say no alt text exists. so you know that you need to right click on each image and type in your alt text description. And along with all the Microsoft products, if you use Adobe Acrobat to run the accessibility check, it will flag each image and you can add your alt text from there. Here is a screenshot of the accessibility checker in Acrobat, in Adobe Acrobat for a PDF file. In order to generate this report, you're going to, again, you'll go to Tools and then select the Accessibility Tools, and you'll click on Full Check. And this will generate a report that will help you find and correct errors, such as figures missing alt text, missing bookmarks for navigation, color contrast problems, etc. So here's the dialog box, and we leave everything checked by default so it catches everything. And then again, you want to clear out as many errors as you possibly can from the report. So that is the technical approach to how you insert alt text. Now I want to move on to our second goal, where we talk about how to write effective alternative text. How do you do image description? It's one of the #1 questions that I get doing this job. So we've written some general tips for you. You can use this as a nice little checklist. This is the general approach that I use to every single image, no matter whether it's a very simple photograph or it is the most complex bar graph, line graph, scatter plot graph imaginable. These are the same approaches for any kind of image. So I'm first going to work from general to specific. And I want to create one general sentence. My very first sentence of alt text is going to be a general overview of the image, what type of image, and the main content of the image. The reason I want to do that is because I want that important information right up front. And then the person who is listening with the screen reader can tune out or move along. That you want to give them that important information right away so they know to focus and pay attention. It also helps provide a framework for the listener so they have a general idea of what to envision, and then you fill in the details from there. It helps with memory and recall and processing that information. So always work from general to specific. Always use proper grammar, spelling, and punctuation, and do not include any hard line breaks, which means don't hit enter, as you are writing your image description. We do this because screen readers are very sensitive to capital letters, all caps, punctuation. If there's a comma or a period, there's a different length of pause. So people who are using JAWS or NVDA or these very robust screen reading programs, they are very sensitive to and can understand and hear those differences in capital letters and punctuation. You also want to think about providing information in multiple modalities if possible. So I always recommend people think about, if it's your document and your content, think about adding a caption for figures or tables that comes right before or after the image or the table. And that way, everyone will have the benefit of your description, and then the alt text behind the actual image can be far more brief because the caption is doing a lot of the work of describing the visual appearance or the important content of the image. So think about captions. You also, when you're writing your alt text, try to reduce redundancy when possible. So if you look around the image and the surrounding text does a great job of referring to and describing what the image looks like, then your description can just fill in the gaps and be a little bit more brief. And then always remember to edit your alt text thoroughly, enlisting another person to QC your work or just edit and do quality control of your work whenever possible. Because so brief history on me, for 10 years, I was an English instructor and got my doctorate in English literature. And I am a great speller, but when I write alt text, my spelling skills jump out the window. My grammar skills fall down a hill. Everything is terrible. And I really need to edit closely. And it's like I'm a different person writing when I write alt text, because so much of my brain is busy translating the image into language that my spelling and grammar falls by the wayside. And so editing becomes very important. And I would make sure that you are trying to get other people to edit your alt text so that you have more input and so that you can catch those mistakes that creep in. So I have this example of an image here, and I'm not going to describe it right away because I would like you all to try and describe it. So if you feel like participating and you would like to try and type in the chat, I would love to have you all try and describe this image. So first, you want to summarize what you see in one general informative sentence. You're going to want to keep your description neutral and informative. And you're going to want to use proper grammar, spelling, and punctuation, and then avoid any symbols or acronyms that might be mispronounced by the screen reader. So if anyone would like to try and describe this, you could feel free to type it in the chat, or if you want, you can unmute yourself and give me just a brief 1 or 2 sentence description of this image. And I'll give you all a minute. All right, so it looks like I don't have any takers this time around, and I completely understand. It is the end of a long week, so I'm just going to go through some of the things that I think about when I look at this image. So if I were to describe this image, I would say it is an enormous cat. So I'm going to start with the most important part. An enormous cat that has been photoshopped into a city, and it is leaning with one arm on top of a building. And so I am foregrounding that very important central image, which is a giant cat. When I have used this in trainings in the past, some people bring up wonderful questions, and I'm going to try and work through some of them because I think they're all valid. So I have people ask me, is it relevant that this is a meme, right? An M-E-M-E, a meme. And I would say, yes, you could definitely mention that this is a popular meme format where you take a cat and you manipulate the image to make kind of a joke or something. You could definitely mention that this is a meme. I've had people say, well, what if I just say it's a gigantic cat? And so to that, I would say, I think you need to either call it a meme or a Photoshop to indicate just how enormous it is. Because when I see a gigantic cat and say, that's a gigantic cat, it's usually not this big, right? This is larger than a building cat. So I've also had people who didn't see the cat because maybe I was presenting, they were sitting far enough away from the projector or from the board where we were presenting that they just saw this as a big white cloud. They thought it was smoke. Two buildings were on fire in the foreground. So you want to remember that when you are using images, not just in a digital format, but in any kind of presentation in person, you also want to describe your images for your audience if they're important. If they're just decorative or silly, you might not need to. But you don't want people to miss out on this great cat, right? I also had a lovely coworker who was teasing me one time and just came in. He saw this picture on my desk. It's actually on my bulletin board. He made no mention of the cat whatsoever, and he said, "Oh, look, Constantinople," and walked out because he knew it would just make me laugh that he didn't even acknowledge the main part of the picture. So a one sentence or two sentences to describe this. You want to get to the point and maybe talk about the cat and mention that it is a manipulated photo. And if you want to talk about the cityscape, that's fine. Maybe do that in a second sentence that describes, the city and the water and a boat. But really, the point is that giant cat. So people often ask me after I go through how to describe something, they'll say, well, how long does it have to be? And so we recommend that the best practice is about 125 characters or the length of a tweet. And I have this enormous Twitter logo here so that you remember that. And you always strive for brief whenever possible. Now, that said, all of the accessibility work, or much of the accessibility work that we do, we usually go a bit beyond that because we're trying to describe educational images. And, we need to be a little bit more thorough because it's for someone taking a course and we want them to pass the class. So depending on your purpose, you can always go longer. But if you can make it brief, try to make it brief. And I'll talk a little bit about why we try to keep things brief in a moment. The default setting for the JAWS screen reader, which is a popular software, it pauses after 250 characters when it's on the default setting. And so you also want to think about how it's going to work with different technology. And so if you can say things and you can consolidate your alt text into one or two sentences, you're going to, that's best practice for most programs, and they won't get cut off or or cause any problems in being read. Excuse me. So again, all of that said, keep things brief when possible, but depending on your purpose or audience, alt text can get quite long. And when that happens, I would again urge you to consider providing captions or maybe a table with the data in the image. If you've got a lot of numbers, if it's a graph, and there's just to describe it thoroughly would involve a lot of data, maybe you could provide a table of the data underneath the image, and then you could do you could write briefer alt text description for the image itself. And all of this again is contingent on whether or not you are the owner or creator of the document. Sometimes you just have to work with what you're given. Another key aspect of making sure that your alt text is kind of streamlined and effective is to remember to focus on the meaning of an image and not on the appearance as much as possible. So in this example, on the right-hand side of the screen, I have a chemical reaction, and I was writing the alt text in a chapter of a book. And so I read a little bit to find out more about what these different symbols meant. And so in this example, You would want to avoid describing a ball labeled with a plus sign. And if you know what it's really called, it would be far easier to just say a positron. Or avoid describing a squiggly arrow labeled with a weird Y, which is actual alt text that someone on my team wrote, and instead call it a gamma ray. That is going to be so much more clear and to the point for someone listening with assistive technology. And it doesn't matter that the arrows are red or blue. There's nothing about, unless it has thermal information for the reaction, that might be important. But a lot of times, if it's squiggly or straight, if there's a plus sign or a minus sign, if you can call it what it actually represents, it can make things a lot more effective and efficient for the listener. So another reason why we want to keep things brief whenever possible is we want to consider someone's cognitive load. Cognitive load is also often referred to as auditory fatigue, and that is something to consider when you're describing images so that you don't overwhelm the listener's working memory. So if you've ever been given a list of things to remember, if you've ever played that game about things you're supposed to bring to a picnic, the average person can remember about 7 items at a time in their working memory. So anything more and things start degrading and falling off the list. So simplifying and reducing your alt text description also reduces that sense of auditory fatigue. Also consider that someone listening to the alt text description of images is hearing extra content in the file. So someone who is sighted, who is not listening to alt text, who is just viewing the graph, or in this case, this large, complicated infographic, I could decide to skip this if I wanted to. But if you have long alt text description, someone listening to a screen reader is going to have to wait to go through all of that. So keeping it brief whenever possible is ideal. For this giant infographic, unless this was for an exam and someone was going to be tested on every single part, depending on the context, we could write very, very long alt text. We could also maybe take some of these out and separate them and provide tables for some of this data, or lists of some of these measurements. But if I were just to write brief alt text for this, I would describe it as a complex infographic titled Universe Infographic Elements with the following sections: temperature on planets, Milky Way galaxy structure, moon expeditions, and then I would just go through and read and write down all of the separate sections for someone. So that's how I would approach that very briefly. So we've talked about a little bit about how you want to create that first sentence with the general approach, the overall meaning and content of the image, and then work from general to specific to fill in details. And now I'd like to proceed to move through different examples of different types of images with all of you. And so this will give you some templates to use for later, and we're just going to look at different image types, and I'll walk you through how we approach making them accessible with alt text description. So in this first example, I have 2 different types of images. They're both small. On the left-hand side, I've got a little book with a finger image at the top. And then on the right, I have these little tiny graphics on a border at the top and bottom of a page in purple. So they're little tiny images, but they function differently. So in the first example of the book with the finger, that is what we would call an icon, because every time it appeared in this particular book, it indicated a resource that they could look up somewhere else. So in this example, we would describe it briefly with the words, the resource icon. And it has a function throughout the text. So if you've ever looked at a textbook and you'll see maybe a little light bulb icon every time there's like an innovative idea, or a little computer every time there's a website resource. So little icons like that, we will just refer to as the resource icon or the further examples icon, something like that. The example on the right is purely decorative. There's no function. It's not referring to anything. It's just making the page a little bit more visually interesting, but there's no educational or meaningful content here. So purely decorative images can be marked as decorative if you have that option when you right click. Sometimes Microsoft Office will allow you to mark an image as decorative, or just simply leave the alt text field blank. And all the person will hear is the word graphic, and then it will read the next text after it. So it will just, it might be a little mysterious if you have a lot of empty alt text fields, and someone listening will just hear graphic, graphic, graphic over and over again. So if you have a chance, mark it as purely decorative, and that way the assistive technology will simply skip it entirely. So moving on to a little bit more complex images, we've got a photograph of a person, and we have a photograph of a political rally or a protest. Photographs should be described, again, you want to do that same approach, right? Try and describe it in a sentence or two. Start with the most important and provide details. Move from general to specific, providing details last. So for a picture of a person, we simply just put the person's name. So here I would write Marilyn Monroe. If it's in a fashion book, depending on my audience or context, if it's about old movies, I might want to provide more information, but we simply advocate just Marilyn Monroe suffices, just the name. I've seen people try to flesh out their description and add a black and white photograph of Marilyn Monroe with dark lipstick and blonde hair and long earrings and a fluffy, I don't know what she's wearing, right? And really you just need the name. So trying to keep things brief to reduce that auditory fatigue is best practice. I've included this example on the right of a Black Lives Matter rally or protest because a lot of people will ask me in these trainings, when do I mention race and ethnicity? When do I mention gender? When do I mention political or religious content, right? What do I say? What is too sensitive to talk about? And I would just say, try to consider the context. If it's not important to mention someone's race, ethnicity, or age, or gender, then you don't need it, right? If you just have clip art of coworkers sitting around a conference table, it does not matter what their age, gender, or even what they're wearing. You could leave that and just say coworkers. But in this case, this was in a history textbook, and it is important what the moment is, who the people are, who is protesting. You could see these are mostly young. It's a young and diverse group of people. So you try to describe situations that are sensitive in brief, neutral terms. So you don't want to choose sides. You don't want emotions or subjectivity to creep in. So for example, this was really easy for me to describe because I could transcribe some of their signs and get the message across without making my own judgment or writing, trying to explain the movement or anything. So my example of the alt text I wrote here, a crowd of Black Lives Matter protesters. So that first sentence sums up everything. And then my sentence with more detail, general to specific. The protesters are of different ethnicities and hold signs that read, "I can't breathe," "No justice," and "If you're not angry, you're not paying attention." So I'm letting their signs speak for themselves. If I wanted to include a little bit more, I could say, I could talk about the age demographic if I wanted to, if it was important to the context. But that's, we try and leave sensitive information out unless it's important to the meaning of the photograph or the context of where it appears. So here's an example of a very simple diagram of a cell. Simple diagrams often just need 1 or 2 sentences, depending again on your context and your audience. So here I would describe this as a diagram of a cell. The chitin cell wall forms the outer skin of the cell with the cell membrane just inside it. And the membrane is filled with cytoplasm that contains the nucleus, mitochondria, and a vacuole. And so that gives someone a sense of, all right, there is a boundary with the cell membrane, and then inside there are these different structures. For something a little bit more complex, like a bar graph, you use the same approach. You're going to work from general to specific. Begin by naming the type of graph and the title. Then you're going to describe the vertical and horizontal axes. If this were a STEM book, like a science or math book, you might want to call these the X and Y axes. And then describe every single data point or every bar in the graph in very regular, predictable ways. If I were to use simple alt text or very brief alt text, I would just include the first sentence. And then if I wanted to describe it further, I would go in and add more sentences describing each bar. So I'm going to read this aloud to you so you understand what I mean. And then once you describe every bar, if you're including long, comprehensive alt text, then you're going to finish by describing any implied visual impact. So when I look at this bar graph, the main visual impact is that this big, giant purple section representing white population is going down each year or each 25-year or however long this is, 10, 25, 20. Well, that's not regular. Anyway, it goes from 1990, then jumps to 2000, then 2025, then 2050. So the white population is going down and there is a larger demographic of different ethnicities. So that's the main implied visual impact. So I'm going to want to mention that somewhere in my alt text. So the alt text I've written for this example, I want to hit the what type of graph and then the name of the graph and then generally describe the axes. So I have a bar graph titled US population by race that compares the percentages of Black, Hispanic, white, and other races in the United States for the years 1990, 2000, projected 2025, and projected 2050. Now, if I wanted to go long and more comprehensive, I would then start describing the first bar and give the percentage breakdown and move through each bar in the exact same structure of my sentence to make it easier for someone to understand. For a line graph, you want to do the same thing, include the title of the graph, the ranges on the horizontal and vertical axes, and then summarize the trends of lines if possible. So a positive slope line, a negative slope line, a stable line, and then if every data point is needed, maybe consider converting the graph into table format so that you could present this information in multiple modalities. So you could have the visual line graph, and then you could have the data in a table below that someone could tab through and listen to. Here is an example of a flow chart, very simple flow chart here. And often flow charts, while they look complex and they look like they would be difficult to describe, they can often be presented as a simple list with maybe different levels of hierarchy. So you could either have numbered options, or in text form, you could write things out. So you could write it out as a numbered list, or you could write it out like a couple sentences of text in this example. So I have described this flow chart as a flow chart with 6 main steps. The flow chart begins with start, then step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, and step 5. If yes, proceed from step 5 to step 6A and stop. If no, proceed from step 5 to step B and stop. So that's in text form, or you could just simply type it out as a numbered list. For cartoons and memes, you want to simply describe the visual scene and the dialogue. Try not to over-explain the joke, which is something I'm guilty of all the time. I want to really convey how funny I think something is, and I want people to smile and be entertained. But you want to keep things neutral, and really sometimes if you try to describe why something's funny, it's hard. It's really hard to describe why something's funny. So the alt text that I've written for this really great Far Side cartoon on the right-hand side is a cartoon showing a woman walking towards a bird in a cage and carrying a large blanket decorated with ferocious predators. As she says, quote, "Bedtime, Leroy, here comes your animal blanket." The bird looks dazed and has no feathers left. So, you know, there's a part of me that just wants to describe the absolute glee on the face of the cat and the alligator that they look so dangerous but so silly, right? There's a part of me that loves this cartoon so much I want people to get it. And the face of the bird is priceless. But just keep things neutral. Make sure you describe everything you see. Create that overview sentence. You want to describe what's being said or the caption of a cartoon, but trying to go in and describe what's funny often you spend a lot of time and energy and you don't get there. Okay, here's another example of a very complex infographic. And we have, you know, I have described this as an infographic of the evolution of dinosaurs that includes a timeline of different eras, a phylogenetic tree or genetic tree, and illustrations of each dinosaur, right? So you've got that evolutionary tree, you have images of the different dinosaurs, and then down below you have a timeline. So there are 3 main components. I might even refine my alt text there and say an infographic of the evolution of dinosaurs with 3 main sections: a timeline of different eras, a phylogenetic tree, and illustrations of each dinosaur. So that's kind of helping someone understand how many parts are involved, and it's just a little bit more helpful to the listener. So you always want to, again, no matter how complex an image is, no matter how many parts, it might take a minute to sit and look at this image and figure out, how am I going to describe this in one clear overview sentence? And then how am I going to work in details if I want to, right? So you're going to work from general to specific, keep your description neutral and informative, again, using proper grammar, spelling, and punctuation. So if I needed to, I might have a list of the different eras the timeline represents underneath this image. If I didn't want to include all that data in my alt text, I might have a list of all the different dinosaurs down below the image. That would be more accessible for people. They have a list. So creating those multiple modalities so that someone accessing this image, if they can't see it and you don't want to type out all of that alt text and cram it into the alt text field, you might want to consider a caption that lists all the dinosaurs, or a table that has all the different eras, so that that information is accessible to everyone. So here I have another example of an infographic, and this one would be perfectly translatable into a table. So this is an infographic that has different cloud formations, and on the left it lists the different cloud formations with a description of each one, and they're arranged by height and where they appear in the atmosphere or stratosphere. And then on the right, it's an image of each cloud type and what they look like. So ideally, instead of having to cram all of this text that's incorporated into the image or infographic, you could simply take all this text out and make it regular text, and then just describe the appearance of the clouds. Or you could create a table, and on the right-hand side, I've kind of described how I would approach this. If you sorted all of this information in this great infographic, it's a very informative infographic, but it's not very accessible to someone with a screen reader. So if I wanted to create a table, I could have different column headings that included cloud type, elevation, appearance, and description, so that I could just cut and paste all of these text descriptions into a column and then write in what elevation they appear at and a brief description of what they look like. And so then I'm doing less work. So sometimes when an infographic is intense and just crammed with information, you could think about those multiple modalities to help you out. So I'm not going to read all of the alt text for this, but I'm including a slide that has a very robust map. The map has a lot of information. It's titled Areas of Industrial Concentration from 1870 to 1914. So there's a lot of industry and industrial revolution happening during that period. So there's a lot of symbols on the map. So when you're describing a map, you want to include the title of the map if it's available, the time period, the general area that's involved, and then describe any inset information. So here we have an inset that focuses on what different structures or areas are indicated on the map, such as a coal field, iron ore deposit, etc. So my alt text, if I were writing brief alt text for this map, it would only be 2 sentences, and it would be a map of Europe titled Areas of Industrial Concentration from 1870 to 1914. The map highlights coal fields, iron ore deposits, industrial areas, ports, steelworks, oil wells, cities with a population of 1 million or more, and international boundaries. So I am gesturing towards all of the data on this map. And then if you wanted or you were required or someone needed this for an exam, below I have a much longer comprehensive alt text description that gives trends of where these cities are located, which countries or areas in Europe have the most iron ore deposits, and it goes into far more detail. So depending on the purpose of your image, what kind of document, what kind of audience, you could think about how much detail you need to include. One last thing, another reason I included this map example is often when you're writing alt text for maps, people get caught up again in focusing on the appearance instead of the meaning. So it doesn't matter what color the coal fields are on the map. It doesn't matter that the industrial areas are shaded diagonal lines. That has nothing to do with the content. So you can focus just on the content and ignore what color countries are, that, you know, forests are represented by a tiny pine tree. That doesn't matter. You could just talk about forests are located in this region. So maps are often very confusing for people. They have a lot of data in them. So wrapping up, I just want to talk a little bit about tables and table alt text. We've talked a lot about images and figures and graphs and charts. I want to talk about tables. In a Microsoft Word document or a PowerPoint, you can provide alt text description for images, and we recommend that as best practice. We don't describe the data when we do that, because if it's an accessible table that someone can highlight the text and hear it read, then someone will have access to that with a screen reader. And the alt text that we write, we call it structural alt text. The structural alt text is really very brief, and it's just going to give the person listening with screen readers, it's going to give them a sense of the organization of the table. So our structural alt text, it will give someone a chance to hear what all the column headers are, understand how the table is organized if they want to tab through each cell, and it will give them a chance to decide whether they need to listen to it, because someone using a screen reader is going to have to enter into table mode in order to hear the table data. And if they listen to the alt text and they hear what the different columns are, they could decide, oh, I don't want to go through the trouble of changing modes to listen to the data. I'm just going to skip that table. So our structural alt text is, for this table, this example, is table 10.1. So we want to name what kind of image it is or what kind of object it is. So it's a table, then the title, and then we are going to go through and count how many columns across and how many rows. And that, again, gives someone an idea of the size, scope, and organization of the table. So the alt text I've written here, the structural alt text is table 10.1 is titled Physical Properties of the Giant Planets. It has 5 columns and 13 rows. The column headings are physical property, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. And then if you look at the picture of the table, the screenshot of the table that I've included here on the right-hand side, you'll see one of my pet peeves. Often when people are making tables, they merge cells or they leave information out. So in this table example, that first column heading is blank. There's no information about what all of these different things in this first column are or what they have in common. And so I had to sit and think about it. Now, obviously, the answer is in the title of the table, but it took me a minute. I was wondering, what do all these things have in common? What do I call this column? And so we ended up calling it physical property in the alt text, even though it's missing in the actual table. So try not, if you're creating your own tables, always make sure you include your column heading. And then you want to, again, I mentioned this briefly before, if this comes in incredibly, this is incredibly helpful to someone if you're describing a chart or a graph. The charts and graphs have been made into charts and graphs for a reason. There's usually some data that someone wants you to visualize to get a point across. So leaving out the visual impression may leave out important information if you don't include that. So if I were to describe this bar graph here as a bar graph titled maternal mortality in selected states, and then I just listed all of the states and gave you the numbers of mortality rates, I might not be doing a great service to why this was visualized. So I think the reason that it's visualized is that they've put Georgia, which is where I am, at the very top, and they only have selected states. They're listed in descending order of mortality, and Georgia is more than double all of the other selected states. So I'm going to want to include that visual information or that visual impact somewhere in my description. Okay, so I have come to the end of my lesson for today. I really appreciate you all attending and being a part of this. I know that it is the end of the week. Does anyone have any questions? Or I'm happy to go back and look at some of those examples or answer any questions you might have about alt text or accessibility today.
Well, Valerie, you've got a tough order here on a Friday afternoon before a long weekend, and I know we don't have a lot of people in the room. We can go ahead and close it out if we don't have any additional questions in the next few moments. But thank you to those who attended, and Valerie, thanks again for an excellent presentation. I'm sure this will be a tremendously valuable resource as people review the archive of this as well.
Thank you, John. I hope so. It's a lot of information. I gave a lot of different specific examples that hopefully will be helpful as a leave behind resource for people to refer back to if they need it.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. And thank you also to our captionist as well for her services today. And with that, we'll go ahead and close it out. And I hope you all have a wonderful weekend.